Hi, John.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm not complaining on camera. Uh, Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads and meaningoflife.tv, on which this will appear. This is an episode of The Wright Show. You are John McWhorter. Familiar to Blogging Heads viewers, certainly. But for those who aren't familiar, you're at Columbia.
That's
You're
right.
a linguist, is that right?
That's right.
And a public
Yep.
intellectual. You've written about a lot of things.
hmm
Books and so on. Any particular book you like to plug?
Well, I guess Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue, The Untold History of the English Language, that's one of my most popular ones and one of my favorites. The Language Hoax, which is about language and thought, came out last year, and I like the way that's gotten around.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another group of people who know me from my race work, and I think really the one that put me on the map, such as that is, was called Losing the Race, Self-Sabotage in Black America. That book is getting old. Winning the Race, which I wrote 5 years later, has a lot more in it and I think represents me a little better than Losing the Race. But, it's getting to the point where there are a bunch, but I would mention those three, probably.
So all that's left is the book Finishing the Race in a Dead Heat.
It will never be written.
That's the sequel.
I guess Glenn and I have been doing that as blogging heads. Yeah.
Yeah, Glenn Lowry, your frequent conversation partner on Blogging Head. So this conversation is one of a series of conversations I am doing on Meaning of Life TV with notable people. You'll be happy to hear we've deemed you notable.
Thank you.
About the meaning of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, we all have lives.
I try to have
They
one.
probably have meaning. So, for starters, let me ask the abstract version. What gives your life meaning?
No one ever asks me that. I think the last time I was ever asked that was probably in the spring of 1994. I would say that
Wait a second. You remember the last time? No, you don't really remember the last time somebody asked you that question?
it was a Bulgarian intellectual who was given to talking about such things over dinner, and he actually wanted to know the answer. And I don't remember what I said then, but I would say now that what gives my life meaning is probably two things, and it wouldn't be what I think most people who would know me from a distance would think. I love to try to make sense of data that looks chaotic, and that means with my languages, that means with race, that means with my thoroughly private obsession with paleontology, which I love every bit as much as everything else.
You're out of the closet now. I didn't know about this.
And, this is huge. In another life, I would be a docent at the Natural History Museum. But for me, bringing order out of chaos or watching other people do it gives me a great sense of meaning. And then also, and this is going to sound kind of corny, but music gives me that. I don't make my living as a musician, but I teach music history here at Columbia.
And you play piano or something, right? Don't you?
I play piano. I play piano for a group cabaret show down in Greenwich Village. And to tell you the truth, musical theater, for me, I'm, what some people call a straight musical theater queen. For me, a good musical is church. I get a feeling out of that I can tell is what many people get every Sunday from going to church. I am a complete and implacable atheist. I do not call myself spiritual. I am not agnostic. I think that all evidence is that God, as conceived of in the Abrahamic religions, is a fiction. And I go against Black American culture in feeling that way. But I do feel that way. If anything, the fact that more people don't feel that way is one of the frustrations of my life. And so there is nothing that I would remotely call spiritual.
Were you brought up religiously?
Not particularly. My father was Presbyterian. My mother was Baptist. Neither of them were particularly religious. I think if you really probed both of their minds, neither of them are with us now. But I don't think either one of them truly believed that there was a God in the sense that we're often told, although culturally as Black Americans, they were raised to to have a certain obeisance to the idea. My mother actually made us being my sister and me, my father didn't go along with it, Quakers when I was about 11. And so we would go to Quaker meeting every Sunday. We did that, and I liked the political and the social aspects of Quakerism. Right. But the part about God, I just became more sure after the age of 8 that simply had no meaning. And so, no, I can't even pretend that there was a journey. I knew when I was 8 that there was no God.
Really?
And I just, I would say it's one of the things that frustrates me the most, that in dealing with humanity, part of our story, both past and present, is there's so many people, some of them are very near and dear to me, who really do believe that Jesus loves them and that they're going to live in his grace, etc. Because for me, all of that is complete and utter science fiction. It's hard. That's one of the hardest things in my life. But life does have meaning. It doesn't come from those books, though. It comes from aesthetic experience, and it comes from the fact that I think I'm obsessed with trying to neaten things up.
Okay, so there's no kind of transcendent source of meaning, or is that too abstract a way to put it? I mean, would you say that meaning is the meaning we make is the meaning we have?
There's a little more than that. I believe that in terms of transcendence, I don't believe that we are going to transcend into the arms of a deity or that deity's son or anything along those lines. But is there something more? Is there some sort of coherence that we don't know? Is fate completely random? I have a very strong sense that it isn't. And actually, one of the things that really fascinates me, and I don't think I'll ever have the equipment to figure it out myself, but I'm sure that we're going to get some surprises, is that great fan of paleontology though I am, great fan of Darwin though I am, I have always suspected there's something beyond natural selection that explains how we got from dirt to where we are. And it has nothing to do with God or creationism, but there's some mechanism beyond that ends up creating complexity and creating a bias towards it and creating brand new body plans. And you may remember that I did a blogging heads.
I remember it quite well, John.
Yeah, it was a big disaster because
I wouldn't use the word disaster. Let's say it was controversial.
Well, I wasn't allowed to play any reindeer games for about 10 minutes because I wasn't supposed to give Michael Behe a platform at all.
Well, it's a long story. What happened was, I think, was yours the second or the first? There were two. We had an actual creationist on, and you talked to him, and you wanted to talk to him, I think. And
right, although Behe is quiet about that part. He's an actual, serious biologist.
You did talk to Behe. It was Behe himself, Michael Behe, the biochemist.
I did a whole hour with him after he had written a book in, I believe, 2010, where I was just interested in grilling him on the issue of, I don't believe that God created any of these things. However, it's clear that Darwin's theory alone doesn't explain everything. Can we meet somewhere in the middle? That's what I was trying to do.
And I think the backdrop was we had already gotten blowback from having an out-and-out flat Earth creationist on.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I forget the exact sequence. But then, and I think yours happened while I was on a silent meditation retreat, so I only heard about it days after the event.
I'm sorry.
I mean, was yours the one where they briefly took it off the site?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was the second one. So I get at anyway. People don't care how my buzz was harshed, as they say, when I got out of meditation retreat. But the first thing I found out was there was a giant controversy. So, but this is interesting because I mean, you were so emphatic about saying you're an atheist, and I think a lot of people who have said a couple of things you've just said. One is you even alluded to something called fate or some. I think most people who are open to something like that might back off and at least use the word agnostic. Now, I take it maybe you're being just very technically clear, which is you're atheistic. You don't believe there's a God. That doesn't mean there's not something weirder than is obvious going on.
Precisely. There is no fee, and particularly what we're given in certain books, etc. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something larger that might give us explanations for things that otherwise seem rather baffling. I must admit, though, I don't walk around hungering to know exactly what those things are as much as some people might. But there is something, but it is not a fee. It is not a God in the sense that we're often told.
So do you think there are like coincidences that are too strange to be coincidences? I mean, like Carl Jung talked about synchronicity, which I totally failed to don't even know actually literally what he meant, but he meant something beyond scientific materialism, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I believe that there are times where coincidence seems mathematically, statistically, almost uncanny. And if that can be proven not to be the case, then once again, evolution. It seems to me from reading various very intelligent skeptics that there hasn't been enough time for what we've seen to happen just by chance. There seems to have been some other mechanism that allowed the development of such brand new structures from such primordial beginnings, although I fully understand what the basic principle is supposed to be. Now, was that a driving force with intelligence? Of course not. But something more has gone on, and I am mildly interested in knowing what that was.
So like Henri Bergson used the term élan vital or something. Another thing I don't know the meaning of. But anyway.
Depends on what he means by vital. Like, I hope it's not something teleological, the vitalness. But yes, something, what he meant, meaning that there's something external, there's something more, there's something that creates, not creates, something that had it so that things led in certain directions, perhaps by accident. And I think our brains are too small to fully understand what it was. I'm not sure how you feel about things.
Well, I actually, oddly, I agree and disagree. I am one of the very few people who has a strictly material view of natural selection. I mean, a lot of people have that, and yet think there's reason to think there is something teleological. In other words, it's just a machine, yes, but when you look at where it's headed, it could be a machine that was in some sense, and I would emphasize in some sense, set up, quotes, for a purpose. And that doesn't necessarily imply an intelligent, well, it's definitely not intelligent design. That's what I mean when I say I have a materialist view of natural selection. But it doesn't even necessarily imply that it's some kind of intelligent being that set the thing in motion or invented the algorithm of natural selection. I'm just saying, seems to be anyway. There's almost no one I know of who believes in a materialist teleology, and that's actually the position I think we should leave open.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine we can leave it open. I wish I could mentally explore it more, but there are other things that just obsess me. There are certain mysteries about the way art hits you, which I imagine ultimately come down to aspects of synapses, but sometimes there seems to be more than that. Why is Beethoven so marvelous? Why does anybody relate to what Charlie Parker did the way that they do? There's a greatness there. Those are the sorts of things that definitely give my life meaning. But I am such a dilettante. I'm always so busy searching that meaning out that I don't give much thought to exactly what that thing is. But life does require meaning. Yes, it's not just a word.
And final question about the coincidence. This has always fascinated me because, this is a very human intuition that some coincidences are too weird. I've asked a class of students of 40, 50 students, how many of you have at some point been, and maybe you had a big decision to make, or you were under pressure or something, and you heard, and some song came on the radio. It seemed like such a weird coincidence, or something else that seemed so apt, and you just went, whoa. And for at least a second, you were thinking, this is some kind of sign or something. And a very high, over 90% of the people, when I've asked, have said, yes, that is. So that feeling is very human. Is that the kind of thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know this is the sort of thing that a certain kind of person just, bats away with a bear paw. But for example, I'm not a mystically or melodramatically inclined person. But when my mother died, when I woke up and got a phone call that my mother died, I had a dream that night of her sinking down and having some sort of disaster in a very abstract way. I don't dream much. And when I do dream, it's generally not about things like that. The last thing I would expect to dream about is the death of my mother. It wasn't expected. And so the fact that dream I had, and I wasn't making up that I had the dream. I don't find anything particularly attractive about the notion of having had that dream. I definitely had it, and then woke up and found out that she had died. I was probably dreaming that while she was dying. That sort of thing leads me to think, well, why would that be? And it's not God, but That seems quite uncanny given that I'm not a dreamer and that I usually dream about things quite different from somebody meeting their end. That's the sort of thing that leads you to think there's something larger, Einstein and beyond, the nature of time, etc. However, that is not something that I wake up on Saturday morning delighting in and thinking of myself as enveloped in. It doesn't give my life meaning. So yes, I have some mysticism in me, but not the kind that shapes my morals or gives me a sense of why I'm on this earth.
Okay. So the art thing is interesting. A lot of people, I think, say this, that art is what gives a meaning. And you're saying there's, as I understand, something special, so special about the feeling, the aesthetic apprehension, as to make you wonder where the hell that came from. I mean, that itself is one of the things that makes you wonder, it sounds like, about the standard evolutionary story.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. There are things that, for example, in the opera Porgy and Bess, there is a chord during the aria, My Man's Gone Now. It's near the end, and it's supposed to symbolize the character's despair. And Gershwin manages a chord, and you can take it apart technically, but it's not really the most complex of chords. But he hits a chord before the climax of the song that sounds exactly the way a woman would feel when her husband was unexpectedly killed in a fight. Captures it. You might even say he captures how the woman would feel if she was a black American in 1925, although that's probably taking it too far. And the fact that that chord makes the hairs on my neck stand on end every time I hear it, and that I would be able to tell you, even if I didn't know the subject matter, that's a chord that signifies despair. Beethoven would have recognized it as a chord that signifies despair. Nobody 500 years before would have. Of course, some of these things are rather arbitrary. But if you have the basic equipment of a Western sense of harmony, the fact that it does it to that extent, or many people get that same feeling from looking at a certain kind of painting or reading a certain kind of poem, gives you a sense of the beyond, certainly. And it's not communicable, and I'm aware that probably most human beings don't feel that with harmony. But if you happen to be the sort of person who's quirkily hardwired to feel that way, you do feel like you're communing with something that's larger than logic, and that seems to almost tell you why you are on Earth, if that makes sense. Because if that weren't there, everything would feel so very much smaller. So there's that, too. For me, that works with music in the same way that for many people it works for pictorial art or other arts. I don't get ballet. For some reason, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. I mean, it's obviously kind of pretty in a way, but it doesn't move me tremendously. It is interesting, Adagio for Strings by the 20th century composer, who is it? What's his, Samuel...
Barber?
Barber.
Yeah, I haven't heard.
That is one of the things that conveys a kind of feeling to me that feels profound and is almost hard to articulate, but there's something about, I don't know, about the...
It puts a certain punctuation in your life. You feel like it's not just hurtling along for a minute.
Yeah, well, and it makes me almost see both the tragedy and the grandeur of life. It almost like helps me back up from the planet and see the whole thing. And
yes, exactly.
And it's almost, in that sense, almost like a mystical experience in a certain sense of that term, mystical experience. I mean, first of all, it's you feel you have been, and knowledge has been imparted. It's hard to articulate. And it's
very hard.
And there's something about parts dissolving into a whole, about the whole thing making a kind of sense that you can't quite describe.
You're up high. Everything makes sense, and a comment seems to be made about the coherence of existence. And it's very hard to articulate it, but great art, that's one of the things that great art do. And it can be with such small tools, and yet one can kill it. Definitely. One of the things that I most like about trying to get undergraduates at Columbia to like classical music, which from the outside can seem quite boring, especially in this day and age, when, unlike in, say, the 1930s, you're not bathed in it so that you learn how to at least pretend to like it from an early age, is that I think that transcendent feeling is less likely with most pop music, and I say that as a great lover of many kinds of pop music. It takes music that took a little bit more work, that's more considered. Many people get that, I think, from a good rhythm. You can get that feeling from the eternal sense of a rhythm that comes over and over again and gives a little sort of pop. Beyond the rhythmic aspect, though, that's what's a little bit less natural and requires some tutelage, like learning to enjoy Jack Daniels or something like that. And yeah, it's because it pulls you away from the world for a second. And that, it gives my life meaning to be able to experience that every now and then. You're making me feel much more mystical than I thought I was.
I'm glad to see this. This is my job, to bring out the mystic in you. I gather there's something a little different between hearing music in the way you've described and having the reaction you've described and playing it. And I don't have much knowledge of it. I fool around with a diatonic harmonica, and I like improvising in when there's like blues music on or something.
Yeah.
And there's a way you can get lost in it that's
Sure.
It's a little different from just hearing powerful music, right?
Yeah. That's where I'm a boring musician, because a lot of what I do, especially lately, I don't get to play solo much. I'm an accompanist. My job is that the singer is up there and I have to figure out her key, and then I am playing underneath her to make sure that she gets her song across best.
Is it improvisational at all?
Yes, it is, but the improvisation is always tied to what he or she is up there doing, and you're afraid they're going to fall and you have to catch them. So it's a kind of sport, but it's rare that I can sit up there and just get lost, because my job is to keep things going. But I know what you mean, and actual accomplished jazz musicians, which I am not, will talk about that feeling. A classical player will talk about that feeling of transport. I haven't had that in a long time, except for once in college when I played a Scott Joplin rag on the piano at 2 a.m, quite stoned, to be honest. I remember having that experience, but that was now 30 years ago, so I can't connect to it anymore.
Well, I'm sure if you really worked somewhere in the vicinity of Columbia University, you could find some marijuana if you want to try to repeat that experience.
Close to my office.
But
I know what you mean. Musicians do talk about having that experience when they actually play.
Yeah. So I guess the difference is, I mean, when I do this, and I would not get a passing grade from anybody when I do it, but I guess maybe the difference is the music I am improvising too. I mean, I am constrained by the music, but it's totally predictable. I know the song. It sounds like what you are doing is accompanying someone who is improvising, and so you have to be mindful of that, and that is a different. I have to be ready for them to improvise. You have to stay more alert and more conscious of what you're doing, I guess.
Exactly.
So now so we've talked about the aesthetic experience, and then you said there's the profound intellectual experience of making sense of chaos, or imposing intellectual order on disarray or something. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of an aesthetic experience?
Yes. It hits the same, it pushes the same buttons. When I figure out something about language, it feels good. And like a scientist, I say that it's beautiful. Or if I'm thinking even about race history in the United States, and I'm trying to think, well, why did this happen in this decade and this happen in the other decade? And I often think, well, it's not just simply because America was racist throughout the whole time. That's part of why I have a reputation as a controversialist, because that doesn't work. But then it isn't because there's something wrong with black people either. That doesn't work. What were the socio-historical factors? And when I come up with a story that makes sense to me, that feels beautiful. I feel like, okay, this is an explanation. This is why things happen. It's counterintuitive. It's more complicated than one might think. That's what you do science for. Nevertheless, it makes a certain sense. It's, you want to clean up your room, and one extends that to trying to figure out the world. Yeah, very similar feeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, one thing I've been asking people about in this series of conversations is death. And I do it partly because most of the people I've talked to don't have the conventional or the traditional reassurance of believing in an afterlife in any clear way. Now, you don't look like death is just around the corner or anything. You're pretty young, but do you ever think about how you're going to handle this as the prospect becomes more tangible? Well,
actually, Bob, I turned 50 2 days ago.
Well, actually, John, that doesn't seem as young to me as it used to seem. So if you want to get competitive about it, I think I will win this one, but go ahead.
Yeah, 50 happened, and so one has to think about these things. I don't fear being dead. I have a big joke with everybody who knows me that I don't intend to die or that I intend to live another 50 years. And I do kind of feel like science is getting to the point where we may be the first generation who really will be able to choose to keep going even longer than what feels intuitive now. But what frightens me is aging. And it has scared me since I was about 10 years old. I used to look at grown-ups beginning to have health problems, and I think, Lord forbid. And when you're 50, you've already experienced the memory gaps that come. You have to just work harder to remember new names, data that I used to know cold. Now I have to go look in the book, and it's not only because of the internet. Those sorts of things. Little physical things that happen. If I didn't work out as much as I try to, my knees would already be bad, and things like that. The idea that I'm not going to be able to think as quickly or that it's going to be hard to get up and down steps, the idea of being infirm absolutely chills me to my bones. I look at it in other people and I think I wouldn't want to be that. And when you look at yourself in the mirror and you see that you no longer look 25, that worries me. I imagine I'll need therapy. Like when I hit, say, 65 and I have to really face that I'm no longer anything anybody would call remotely young, that's going to hurt. Death, well, as you might imagine, you're dead, you're gone, there's no afterlife, there's no grace, and your remains go on to furnish the material for grass and beetles. But no, it's not death I think about. Part of the reason I'm a bit of a workaholic is because I'd like to leave something behind. That is why I've written so many books. I don't like to walk around giving the number of my books the way some people do, because I don't write them to make them into a stack. But it's getting to be a lot, and it's because I want what's going on in my head to be available in a permanent form, because I know I won't always be here. But expiring, fine. I mean, after a certain point, I imagine all this gets kind of boring anyway. But getting sick, I have almost a complex about. I am very worried about that part. And I can tell that I'm going to have to face it sooner rather than later.
Well, there's no rush. I mean, you're just entering your 50s, and what my mother-in-law said about the 50s is it's the best decade because you no longer care what people think about you, but your body hasn't started falling apart. So,
I didn't know we were allowed to not care yet.
I think it's actually a gradual thing. And I don't think we ever quit caring what people think, but the intensity of the concern, I mean, if you go all the way back to like in your teens,
well,
I mean, it's like, I remember we moved around, so I was often at like a new school, and that feeling like, what do people, it was just electric, the anxiety about what people think about you. And
all the time, right?
Yeah, and if you, compared to that, I mean, I still care more than I should, but it's gotten better.
Less and less for me, and I think that's, as you get older, you don't give a damn anymore. But I expect in the 50s nothing horrible likely is going to happen. Steps are still okay. I can see how this will be a good decade. Unlike you though, I'm doing it while raising small children because I got started on that late, and so there's transcendence. I mean, frankly, having small kids, the all joy and no fun really nails it, and it's hard. It really it sucks a lot out of you, and I'm the man saying that. But there is something transcendent in that there is this little being who loves you unconditionally and who is half you and who you can already tell is reflecting traits of yours on a very profound level. There is a meaning there. I'm glad that I got around to that part. Now, if I had happened to meet a woman who didn't want kids, this will be on record for my children to see when they're adults, but I probably could have taken a deep swallow and not had kids. That could have happened. I would write more books. But having had them, I can certainly see why almost everybody does this. There is a wonder in it.
And when you say you would write more books, do you just mean you'd have more time, or are you also kind of saying, like, it is important to leave a legacy in some sense or another, and if you don't have the legacy of children, that's all the more reason to have a kind of a non-genetic legacy?
No, I just mean I'd have more time.
Yeah, okay.
And because I'd get more sleep, I would be a little bit more fertile in terms of creative ideas. Like you are. Every book you come out with is this brilliant hairpin turn from the last one. That gets harder, in my experience, when you are never getting a full night's sleep.
Well, it's nice of you to say it, but mine don't come out with much frequency, which may partly be related to the the child rearing thing, no longer an excuse for me. My kids are we have an empty nest now, but as you noted, then age sets in, and you have a whole new excuse for not being productive. So death is not, you're not freaked out. It's the infirmity thing, and I'm kind of with you there.
Yeah. Steps. People start calling you old man and saying in your day.
Or they start asking if you're eligible for the senior citizen discount at the counter.
Oh, Lord. For example. That's right. That scares me.
The unkindest cut of all. So it sounds like you are not oppressed with existential crises. I just get the sense that, and maybe that's not as profound a question as it sounds like. Maybe I'm just saying you're not prone to mood swings. But I get that sense from you that
no, there's no crisis. I feel like I've done probably what I was meant to do. I'm not terribly worried about, quote unquote, what's it all for, because that's a question that's very different for individuals. That's a question that's very different depending on what country you're from, what your education level happens to be, what your social economic class happens to be. But no, there's turning 50, I am thinking, is this it, or is there something else I want to get along to? There's a part of me that's always wanted to come up with a better method for learning languages as an adult. I've always said that was going to be the third act. Well, I'm in the time when I guess it's the third act, since my mind is probably going to start going in about 15 years. And I'm thinking, am I actually really going to do that? Or I can say, talk about fate. Turn the tape back. I could have been a musician. I could have made, I don't think I would be world class, but I could have made a living in the world of music. And sometimes I think to myself that I might be a more profoundly happy person if I had done that instead of becoming a scholar and controversial public intellectual. There's a little, but no crisis. If I were in Mad Men, I would not be buying a sports car and having an affair right now. I just you take it day by day, and I like my things, and that's not skis and fancy clothes. I like my DVDs. I like my CDs. I still use them. I like the books that I'm reading. I like just my particular couch. And for me, that just, as long as I've got that, then I'm okay. And some people will wonder, well, what about the people? And yes, my family and a small circle of friends. And then my wife and I have a huge raft of acquaintances. But the small circle, of course, is more important. And that'll do. No midlife crisis. I don't think I have time.
Mm-hmm. So final question. You said, before you talked about the kind of fork in the road there once was, but with music heading one way and academic pursuits another, you said you felt you had done what you were meant to do, and I take it you mean that the academic path makes more sense in some sense. But just what exactly does that phrase, what I was meant to do, mean to an atheist? Since ostensibly there's no one who could, there's no one out there whose intentions you can either comply with or fail to. What does it mean, what I was meant to do?
What I was meant to do, as in what I get the feeling I'm hardwired for, which is to look at information that I find diverting and seek to present it to other people in such a way that they get the same joy out of it as me. As in, my mother used to always say, I told her when I was 5, Mommy, I want to be a book writer when I grow up. If you think about it, 5, I'm saying that. And I'm not trying to make myself sound precocious. It's just that I would have the books in my hands and I would say, I want to do these. And I did. And so starting at about 7, I would write these books, The Human Body, called The Human Body, and on each page I'd draw like a stomach, or I'd draw like a femur, and all this is from the books on the human body that I think were especially popular for kids at the time. And then I'd staple it, and I'd give it to my mother, and I'd say, here is my book. And I will say, actually, this is the one time I'm going to say this, because I think it probably is going to sound pretentious or something like this, but I was one of the, apparently it's a condition, it's called hyperlexia. I was reading for real at 3, not just sounding out the occasional word. I was one of those kids who could pick it up, and within reason, I could actually read the book. That's clearly just neural whatever. They're kids like that. But that, then wanting to write books from that age and then writing these goofy little books, I think I was meant to be a book writer. And one way that you are a book writer and make a living is you're also an academic, because it's the same muscle. But I think I was meant to write these books. You know, it's not, some people I think see me and think that my main interest is being on TV or something. Now, my main interest is in writing the books, and they will stand forever. But even if those books were going to self-destruct after 50 years, I'd still be writing them for the now. So I think that's what I was meant to do. It wasn't to be an athlete. You know, it wasn't to be a doctor or a lawyer or any other things that actually matter in the world. I think I was supposed to write books. And I've been really fortunate that I've gotten to do it and eat. And that pretty much sums it up, I think.
Okay. You keep using this form, I was meant or I was supposed to. I'm so a little vague on I mean, you mean, for one thing, made the best use of your talents, I guess.
Yeah, not that God wanted me to do it, but that that's what I was, yeah, those are my talents, and I actually got to use them. Yeah.
Okay.
That.
So the earlier thing you said about, you know, something more, coincidences and so on, that doesn't so much feed into your conception of your calling.
No, not at all. I'm this little creature out of billions who happen to have a certain neural configuration, and I got to ply that trade. And that, in the grand scheme of things, whatever that is, that has no meaning at all. But I would just hope that as many ones of those billions of creatures as possible could realize themselves in that way. I think that's our ideal. Why? Just because. Kant would be the closest that I could come to explaining why. And I don't think Kant genuinely believed in God in the sense that he was supposed to. It's just, it's the best way, given that we're all here dealing with each other and creating a society. And I think that's as far as I can go on that. And as I said, that's hard because I think most human beings seek more and even see something a little arid or denialist about somebody who doesn't. But I'm just stuck with what I am.
Okay, so then we will direct readers to Kant for further elaboration on this, and
so
I hope they have better luck comprehending his writing than I have generally had.
You have to go slow. Yeah,
you're telling me. Give me Hume any day.
That's easier. That's
yes.
right. He's sunny. Yeah.
So thank you so much, John, for opening up. Very illuminating.
No one asks me these things, so thank you for making me think about myself.
All right. Well, take care.
You too.